When you can show people, wow, that problem that a minute ago I thought was unsolvable, turns out there's this breakthrough, this new invention, this new technology, and we can bring it to that problem, and maybe we could solve it at a global scale. That brings a lot of hope.
Hey everyone, welcome to a special edition of Future Around and Find Out from PopTech, a conference that I love. It's where I met this next guest, Pablos Holman. He is an inventor, an investor. He is passionate about creating a culture of invention and bringing more inventors into this world. And I'm so excited to have him back on the show. Welcome to Future Around and Find Out, where we celebrate the breakthroughs, call BS on the hype, and explore how things might go sideways and how we, together, can steer the future in the right direction. Hi, I'm Dan Blumberg. I'm an independent technologist and former NPR journalist, and on the show, you'll hear sharp takes on what builders need to know now. Learn more, sign up for the newsletter, and ask questions of upcoming guests at futurearound.com. You just gave a fantastic opening talk, which was really a call to action.
What I was trying to do is free people up, because the truth is we haven't actually scaled up on problems in the world. We have problems for sure, but we don't have more than we used to have. And what we have done is we've scaled up on our ability to share the problems around the world. Everyone on Earth finds out in minutes about a war in a country they couldn't find on a globe. And so, it's not that you don't want to pay attention to the world or something, but you're being inundated with the worst problem in the entire planet every moment. That's what's at the top of everyone's newsfeed. The worst problem on the entire planet is coming to you. And so you get this kind of skewed perspective that the world is full of these horrible situations and problems. And so the truth is, if you just look at your life, you'd be lucky in one lifetime to have a meaningful impact on any big problem, just one. So trying to be up to the minute aware about all of them is eroding your own ability to make a difference in the thing that you care about or in anything that you care about. And so even if you cared about a lot of things, and most of us do care about more problems than we can meaningfully affect. So the exercise with the sticky notes is, look, it's trying to force you to prioritize and force you to say, okay, what do you care about more? Do you care more about kids starving to death? Or do you care more about, puppies dying in a shelter? Or do you care more about, your family members dying of cancer? I mean, these are all big problems. And it's not to say that one matters more than the other, but which one matters to you the most, because you're probably not going to be able to affect all those things.
Yeah.
But you might be able to affect one if you can focus on it. And to focus on it, you got to cut the noise down. So hopefully that got across.
It absolutely got across. And I think at this moment right now where we are pretty overwhelmed and things feel chaotic, you also pointed out that things are, pretty objectively better on a whole lot of criteria than they were,
Right.
10, 20, 100, 500 years ago. Lifespans are longer and there's fewer people living in poverty and all that. And that's not to discount that there are a lot of big problems right now. I know the problem that one of the biggest ones that you've chosen to focus your time on is creating more space for inventors.
Yeah.
What does that infrastructure look like? What does it mean to help create more inventors?
Well, I think it starts with, how many, artists could you name? Probably a lot. If it's actors, you could probably name a lot. Music artists, for sure, probably 100 before you have to look at your phone.
Yeah.
But try to name inventors who aren't dead. And most people can't think of more than 2. And so the weird thing about that is, artists could be amazing, and we love that they can move the human spirit and those things, and that's great, but you could live without all of them. Without inventors, you would not exist, because this is our most important creative class. These are the people who expand human potential. That's very important, and we don't even count them. Inventor is not a legitimate career choice. If you look on LinkedIn, nobody has inventor as their job title. I was one of the few people who ever had that job title, and that's just because I have a weird career, and it's very unusual. Inventors are in a garage with crazy hair and a DeLorean, they're not thriving. They're taking a huge risk. Usually they're going to fail. To do something new, to do something truly new, to do something the very first time, that takes careers, that takes lifetimes. To do something from the second time to the nth time after that, that's craft. That's my definition of craft. Craft is second time to the zillionth time. But from 0 to 1, to take something that didn't exist and bring it into the world, that's creation. And that's art. And we really celebrate people for the craft. There's no such thing as craft for inventors. There's engineering, and that's very important. So that's our version of craft. If you invent something, now engineers have to take it for a century and make it better. But that first one, people want to throw inventors under the bus. They always say, oh, it was obvious somebody else would have invented it the week after anyway, or someone across the world invented it at the same time, and all this kind of stuff. And, there may be some truth to that, but I just think we've somehow gotten so skewed about this that we don't celebrate those inventors. There's no Nobel Prize for inventors. That's for discovery and science.
I want to do a quick lightning round.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
challenged, yes, I could name 100 musicians. A
Yeah.
quick 1 or 2 line on a bunch of inventors that who are living, who we should know.
Yeah. So I worked with one named Lowell Wood. Lowell Wood has actually just a few years ago surpassed Thomas Edison as the most prolific American inventor. So about over 1,100 patents. And I got to work with Lowell a bit on some of these things. And these are meaningful inventions. A lot of the ones we worked on in my lab originated with Lowell. The more famous living inventors, you could say, are folks like Dean Kamen. So he's the guy who made the Segway, so people know that, but he also invented the portable wearable insulin pump, bunch of medical devices, prosthetic arms for veterans who lost them to IEDs in the Gulf Wars, things like that. And he started the first robotics program, which was kind of a way to celebrate science and engineering and invention for kids, which is an amazing thing. So Dean is a rock star as inventors go. There's an inventor in Australia named Kia Silverbrook, 7,000 patents. And, he has a whole team that's helping him out. And of course, Dean does as well. But those are the success stories. Those are pretty rare. And our lab was also a success story. We were pretty well endowed. Those aren't the people you got to worry about. The ones you got to worry about are in a garage by themselves, and they get 1 or 2 patents in a year. Well, that's not enough to get good odds. You're going to die in obscurity, and most do. And so I just partly I bring it up because I'm trying to find these folks, because we try to find the real meaningful inventions and then invest in them and kind of get them out of the lab and into a startup. I can't find them. You got to I try to make them find me because, they're working in obscurity, but everybody knows one. Everybody knows this crazy friend from high school who's working on something. He's probably going to blow himself up in the backyard. That's gold for me. I want to meet those people if they have something special. And so I think if you find those people or those people, really be compassionate, try to find ways to help them out. Usually they suck at lots of things we take for granted. A lot of times inventors, they aren't prioritizing social skills. They're not hanging out they don't come to PopTech. They need help. They need a whole village. And I think that that's something that we should tune into more and try and be more helpful.
You're pointing out something that you're quite good at. They need storytellers. How did you become, because you are a really good storyteller, and I don't know.
Desperation, completely. I started when I was a kid. I grew up in Alaska, and I got one of the first computers that you could have at home when I was like 10 years old. So having a computer before anyone had ever seen them, most people had never even heard of a computer, much less seen one. Where I lived, I had like the first computer anybody saw, and I'm a 10-year-old kid. So it was almost like a pilgrimage. People would come over to my house down into my basement to see the newfangled computer. They hadn't seen a computer, but they knew they weren't cool. And so I'm trying to explain, no, it's really going to be cool and useful. I just out of desperation was trying to convince people this new technology could be meaningful to them. And so in some sense, I'm still doing that. I moved on from computers. I'm trying to get people excited about robots, nuclear reactors, and all these other things that are coming. But I had to figure out how to make it interesting and accessible to people. And a lot of that was you have to take the complexity out. And so I think I started to really optimize for here's how this is meaningful. So a lot of what I'm doing is just trying to focus people on a problem that even if it's not one they feel or experience, focus on the scale of a problem. And a lot of the big problems in the world are hard to see from, Starbucks in America. Like we're doing pretty good. So to focus somebody on a big problem in the world, a lot of these are problems we solved in the US, but haven't solved globally. So these are big problems. They seem insurmountable, but then you can show them, look, a new technology could be a force multiplier, could change our ability to have an effect. When you can show people, wow, that problem that a minute ago I thought was unsolvable, turns out there's this breakthrough, this new invention, this new technology, and we can bring it to that problem, and maybe we could solve it at a global scale. That brings a lot of hope, a lot of inspiration, and so a lot of times I'm just putting people through that cycle, trying to help them see and appreciate the value of the new inventions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I spoke recently to the head of MetaLab. They help birth companies like Slack and Coinbase and things like
Cool.
that. And he told me that there's a huge talent war right now, which I was happy to hear because
Yeah.
it's not been a great market for tech talent lately. But he said in particular for 0 to 1 talent, that's the hardest thing for them to find right now. And as AI makes other things, the craft piece that we're talking about, easier, more replicable, like that 0 to 1 talent is something that he is really looking for, and that you are
Wow.
also looking for, more people
Yeah, I
like
like
that.
the way you put that.
What are ways that people who want to go beyond optimization or craft, what do you see the most valuable things for 0 to 1 type building skills that people need to have or support that they need to
It's
have?
it's really interesting you put it that way. Just as an aside, if you think about the AIs we have now, they are essentially trained on everything humans have ever done, or at least written. And and so you could expect them to be quite good at craft. You could expect them to look at something and say, "Oh, I need to optimize this." I've seen, because the AI knows every other thing like it that's ever
Right.
been done. You say, "Okay, well, you could step up to here. You could step up to the state of the art, step up to whatever the best version is." Like I don't know, you could probably take a violin performance, feed it into an AI and say, fix this to make it sound like a Chinese violin prodigy. um, and it can do that. But what we're having a hard time with in AI is going beyond that. An AI can go beyond the state of the art essentially by using a random number generator. But we're having a real hard time figuring out, how does a computer become creative? How does a computer do that 0 to 1?
Yeah.
How
Make
is it
novel discoveries.
How does it make novel discoveries? How is it truly creative? And it can, with that random number generator, sometimes it can still stumble upon things that we're like, yeah, that's pretty cool. But that's a different thing. And some humans do that. Even some creative humans, that might be their algorithm. It's just like, I'm just going to try shit and see what happens, and maybe something will be good. But the truth is, there's some version of intuition behind it. There is some creative process in humans we haven't figured out how to make the computers do. But yeah, I think it's a very similar thing. So if you in your career, you certainly want to be compassionate with people who've invested heavily in their craft. We have people who've spent their whole career trying to get really good at building user interfaces, or there's authors. I'm not like a real author. I just writing out of desperation. But there are people who are novelists, or they've honed that craft and they're really good at it. And you don't want to sort of yank the rug out from under them. But at the same time, a lot of the things humans are doing is kind of like, it's like work cosplay. We have a lot of people doing things that we don't actually need done. They're doing a job that it's kind of like we're just babysitting them in the workforce. And they don't love the job. They might be doing what you think of as a craft, but they haven't invested in it enough to feel a personal connection to it. They're just doing it for the paycheck. That's not a really healthy life for a human anyway. So these are the kinds of things the dangerous things, the menial things, the boring things, the repetitive things. Let's farm that out to robots and AI and let the computers do that stuff and free you and me up and all these folks up to do something more meaningful that only a human could do. And I think it's, one way I like to think about that is if you just take free time as an example, in all of human history, free time is probably mostly an anomaly. Most people had to work just to keep from dying, keep their kids from dying, keep from getting eaten by something bigger, that kind of stuff. And the Industrial Revolution was probably really the first moment, and this is a century ago, where the machines became so powerful and useful that they could do the work of hundreds of people or thousands of people, and free time was probably invented around then. And so in the last century, we had to figure out, what do you do with free time? And so we invented the entertainment industry, for one. Books, this isn't something that humans have had for very long. Printing press is from like 400 years ago, right? In the last century, we scaled up this whole book publishing thing. So that was kind of a window in time where it's like, oh, we have free time. We'll make books, we'll print books, we'll read books. Cool. Now we're kind of in a post-book world. This is probably one of the last books that'll ever be bothered to be, made.
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not. But, we'll do it as a hipster dalliance or something. But, books are not strictly necessary going forward. And so, but we also made movies, TV, video games, elections, all these kinds of things we're doing to fill that free time. And we really scaled up on that. So now if you look at a typical life for an American, you could say, I don't know, half of their waking hours they work, and the other half they're doing this stuff. And it's mostly entertainment. But and in spite of all that, we complain about not having enough time. And so that's kind of baffling in one sense. But now that a robot is coming to do the other half, if a robot or AI takes your job and does all those things, now you get twice as much free time. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to watch more Netflix? Are you going to play more video games? I mean, I'm not, look, some people can do that, maybe should do that. But the truth is, most of us could take that opportunity to kind of revisit our priorities and say, all right, what do we care about? And I know I'm ranting here, but let me just give one example. My daughter was in public school when she, growing up, and good public school, can't complain as that goes. But we did complain that every year, 30 students, one teacher. So we got 30-to-1 student-teacher ratio. And my kid, she wasn't like the best kid, and she wasn't the worst kid, so she's kind of in the middle. A teacher essentially has to teach the lowest common denominator. So my kid's not being challenged. She's coming home bored. It's heartbreaking to watch, honestly, because to see a kid not getting to thrive and not getting challenged, not getting to grow, and wasting time in class. And, you can't blame the teachers. They're doing the best they can. They got 30 kids. So we would complain, and some years you get it 28-to-1. That would be a win. All those years, I remember there was just constant headlines about how self-driving trucks are coming, and how this is going to be a big disaster because we're going to put all these truck drivers out of business. And kind of every year there'd be this kind of panic about this problem. And it's a big problem. Truck drivers are where labor unions come from. You put them out of business, you're going to get trucks on fire. But if you look, I remember I would look at the numbers, and we'd have all these years, this is over the last 15 years. You look at the numbers, and there's 50,000 open truck driver positions, sometimes up to 100,000 open truck driver positions in America. And these are jobs that pay pretty well, depending, some are, $80,000 to $100,000 a year sometimes. And I don't know anybody whose kid wants to be a truck driver. I don't know anybody who wants their kid to be a truck driver. So those jobs are open, they're funded, and we're complaining about not having enough teachers. So I would trade any of my kids' teachers for a displaced truck driver and a 1-to-1 student-teacher ratio. That's what's possible here. And so we live in this world where people want to blame technology for all these problems, but the truth is we're not being honest with ourselves and taking responsibility for deploying our time, our attention, our resources, our capital at the things we claim we care about. If you care about kids, you care about education, then take a little bit of free time, find some kid, your kid, neighbor kid, any kid,
Yeah.
nephew, whatever, and just spend an hour with them. Teach them anything. Ask them what they're interested in. Teach them whatever you can about it. None of us do that. I don't even do that. I'm suggesting we do that, but I'm just saying, like, start to think about how do you put your free time to use. If you get more, let's do something with it that you care about.
You focus on deep tech.
Yeah.
You've said there's not enough people who, are steeped in deep tech.
Yeah.
And so we talked about this the last time you were on the podcast, like software people can work on deep tech hardware
Yeah.
problems now, largely because of advances in AI and other things. What is it that the software people who
Yeah.
are interested in deep tech, who they find you, they want to do 0 to 1 things, like where do you begin with someone like that who wants to get into this world and they've been making DoorDash style apps for a while, they want to do something different?
Yeah. And I think, make a DoorDash style app is great practice and experience, because part of what you're doing is you're learning to use the full stack of software. And that's not just the software libraries that you build stuff with, but it is also it's GitHub, it's the machinery it's Slack. It's like, how do you coordinate a team? How do you file bugs in a bug tracker and fix them on a schedule? All that stuff is so heavily optimized for doing new things, for building a new app, a new product. And that's so important, because that's what made software eat the world. We were so efficient with software that we could go rebuild every industry in an app, essentially. And where we ran into a brick wall was once that industry had atoms. Once you got past what you could do with software and you had to make stuff, you had to make food or go after mining or construction or manufacturing or energy or any of these things that Silicon Valley can't touch because they're not exclusively software. You aren't going to radically improve any of those things with software. You're going to need some other technology. But now, why we're at a turning point is the software is so powerful and the computation is so vast that now we can start to aim our computers at solving these other kinds of problems. Now we're using the computers for the drug discovery. Now we're using computers to help us optimize how we do mining and refining. Now we can use computers for automation in factories. Now we use them for automation in construction. So we need them to help us do these new things in all these old industries. And look, most of the people I know are, nerds who ended up in Silicon Valley. They're excited about a lot of other things. They like robots too. They would want to work on robots, but the jobs were in, ad networks and stuff. So now what I'm trying to show is like, look, that was good practice. Now bring that skill set. Help us build some robots and lasers and nuclear reactors.
Right on. We went through this exercise earlier. You had people write down things they were really passionate about and where they were going to take action.
Yeah.
What are 1 or 2 problems that are not top of mind for most people
Yeah.
that ought to be, where there ought to be more attention? I know we've talked in the past about energy, so that's a big one. I
Sure.
think, are there 1 or 2 things that are super critical that if we solve this, like you're focused on inventors,
Yeah.
we solve other things, quote, for free?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the best example, of course, is energy, because everything fundamentally lives on energy. So that's the one I want to solve the most, because if you did solve energy, you would solve things like clean water and sanitation for free. There's still a lot of people on this planet who don't have access to like a toilet that flushes, which is almost inhumane to imagine, but that's really where we're at. We haven't finished that job. We have a big problem with water because we have a lot of industries that have been damaging water for a long time. So our fresh water is depleting. We're going to end up fighting wars over water if we don't solve this. The only practical way to clean up water requires a lot of energy. So yeah, that's a good way to think about that one. But if you were to take others like climate change, I think it's sort of a useless term because it's so big and so overloaded. In some sense, it's such a big problem that it doesn't even describe the issue. There's different contributors to the climate. There's different kinds of pollution. That is how you could think about it, from emitting CO2 and methane and things like that. But you want to sort of break that down into smaller problems, right? Because solving climate change, it's going to take 1,000 silver bullets. There is no solution to climate change. There's going to be 1,000 solutions that add up to fixing, that class of problems. And so I think that's a way to get your head around what can we work on. So, in climate change, clearly the biggest contributor that we are responsible for is burning shit that just emits a bunch of crap into the atmosphere. Obviously, we can get away with some of that. We've been getting away with quite a lot of it. At some point, it's probably too much. And we should clean up our mess and do a better job and be more efficient about it. And there's other good business reasons to do that. Even if you just burn something to get the heat out, it's just inefficient. You end up with a lot of waste. So if you could figure out a way to make the energy with less waste, then you don't have to pay for cleaning that up, and you don't have to pay for storing it or hauling it around or any of that kind of stuff. So there's lots of possibilities coming, and I think it's a good time to get excited about these things because you can see how in your lifetime, if you were powered exclusively by nuclear reactors, all of the waste for all of the energy in your entire lifetime, all the emissions would fit in this can. And that includes your siblings too. I mean, that's how energy dense uranium is. Instead, all the energy in your life, practically what's literally happening right now, is going to be hundreds of rail cars of coal and gas to power you for your lifetime. That's how much waste there is. And all of that becomes emitted CO2 and
I live in the Hudson River Valley. I kayak on the Hudson River, and there are trains which have been labeled bomb trains that are just like diesel car after diesel car after diesel car, and it scares the crap out of me as I see them going up the river.
Well, look, I mean, there's a lot of other exciting areas. We have things like apparel is one that people never think about. But 30% of the clothes made on planet Earth are never once worn by a human. It's like if we took a third of the cars we made and drove them straight from factory to landfill. That's how bad this problem is. Every human on Earth is a customer. It's a staggering scale industry. And we just don't even want to think about it. Well, the reason for that is largely overproduction. We're making these clothes that nobody wants to buy. We don't know that when we make them. We just buy them. We make them.
Right.
We ship them around the planet. We put them on a shelf. Nobody buys it. Then it goes to TJ Maxx. Then it goes to landfill. And that product cycle is, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months long. And so you have to guess in advance what's going to sell. Well, what's going to sell is whatever a Kardashian wears on Instagram. You don't know 9 months in advance what a Kardashian is going to wear on Instagram. So you can't guess. Nobody guesses right. Well, if you could shorten that product cycle and produce clothes on demand, wait for a Kardashian to wear it on Instagram, wait for a customer to click buy now, find out what their size is, you make their clothes and ship them out the next day, you eliminate that overproduction. That's what's possible. That's what's coming. And that's only possible because of automation. So now we're using automation. We have a company called Create Me that's figured out how to make robots make the clothes. So they're at a point where they'll be making the highest quality, lowest cost t-shirt in the world in California, which is probably the dumbest place on earth to make a t-shirt. And it's all robots. So anyway, these are things that can be better. They will be better. And it's an exciting time because all that automation was made by guys who previously worked on consumer electronics. They made phones and laptops at Apple and Microsoft and stuff like that. And they adapted the automation for those factories to doing apparel. And so we need, whatever you're doing right now in software, that's cool. Come help us with all these other things.
Pablos, always fun to chat with you.
Thank you.
I always leave inspired, excited
Okay,
to
cool.
build stuff, so thank you.
I know you don't get a word in edgewise, but that's I'm excited about sharing these stories. So hopefully people like that.
Hope you enjoyed this special edition of Future Around and Find Out. If you did, please share it with a friend. That's how podcasts grow. And you can go to futurearound.com to sign up for the newsletter and find all sorts of other ways to engage with the show. Thanks.